Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a wonderful tropical morning here in Riga, and I appreciate you taking the time to join us in a very, very interesting and exciting discussion on a subject that will affect this wonderful mega project Rail Baltica for many decades to come. We will have a stellar set of panelists today. This presentation and discussion will take place under the auspices of the recently established Rail Baltica Business Club, and it is very, very timely that this subject of Rail Baltica infrastructure management is the first of many subjects that we will tackle in our engagement with the business community for Rail Baltica. Clearly, this is a subject that will affect many, many stakeholders, and again, reacting on the numerous requests from the different, especially business stakeholders in the Rail Baltica community, we as the Rail Baltica joint venture are very pleased to organize and to provide a platform for such engagement for the critical business and other institutional stakeholders in this wider discussion on how the Rail Baltica mega project, or the infrastructure that this mega project will deliver, will be managed. And clearly something that I hope both the joint venture and our wider Rail Baltica community shares is an understanding that Rail Baltica is so much more than just a very complex construction and infrastructure project. Rather, it is a national and regional development project, the creation of a new North European economic corridor, and in light of these important aspects, the issue of infrastructure management takes center stage, especially now that the three governments have undertaken and initiated the negotiation on the outcome of what model will underpin the future management for Rail Baltica. So without any further ado, I'm very honored to introduce Mr. Timo Riihimäki, the CEO of the Rail Baltica joint venture, to deliver the welcome speech.
Thank you. Dear ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the RV Rail office. We have invited representatives of the logistics industry and local international investors to discuss the options of Rail Baltica infrastructure management in the future. As you know, timely selection of a suitable infrastructure management model is critical for Rail Baltica to deliver its benefits to the users, governments and the region. According to the European Commission's decision on the implementation of Rail Baltica, the governments of the Baltic states are planning to take a decision on this matter this summer. Meanwhile, RB Rail commissioned an independent study on the Rail Baltica future infrastructure management to help the governments in taking this decision. We are keen to deliver the findings on this study not only to the ministries of transport, but also to the future customers of Rail Baltica. We know that the future business customers of Rail Baltica want and have to be involved in this important discussion about the infrastructure management. A similar discussion was conducted already in Vilnius during the Global Forum, and we hope to have a discussion in Tallinn too. I hope that today's highly experienced panelists will help to identify the key elements of successful infrastructure management model, and that those industry requests will be considered by the decision makers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Timo. We will now proceed with a little video showing the highlights from the event that Timo just referenced, the Rail Baltica annual Global Forum that took place in Vilnius. Some of the highlights from our discussion on infra management. And before the video, I would also like to inform you that, as you can see, the event is being filmed. It's not live streamed, but of course, in order to document this very important discussion, we have the equipment here today. So, video, please.
An infrastructure manager study by an independent consultant for Rail Baltica was just completed and will be presented later today. It is of utmost importance that all countries respect the result of the study, setting out how the tasks of the infrastructure management should be structured in the Baltic states. The clear recommendations are that for achieving the highest level of efficiency and coherence, the railway traffic management and track access fees implementation should be managed centrally. An attractive railway track for carriers should be a common interest of the three Baltic states. So let me once again stress what I have said earlier. Either there is one coherent Rail Baltica, or we have a fragmented, potentially non-functional setup. In fact, it is here that the national interests should actually be the same as the project interests. And I invite all parties to take a long-term view of the benefits of the business case by doing things jointly, rather than insisting on business as usual model. In simple terms, three infrastructure managers will not achieve the same synergies and results compared to an integrated structure. It would result in more fragmentation, and that is not desirable.
We believe that this really can play a key role in terms of geopolicy. We have seen that, we have been talking this morning about military, for instance, so geopolitically speaking is crucial. It's also an element of connectivities between and cohesion between the regions and throughout Europe, and also a single infrastructure manager operators can ensure coherence in terms of economies of scale, in terms of efficiency of operations, and also an open access and through competition. Compliance with competition rules, allowing open access to all rail undertakings.
Just to summarize, perhaps the success case, if you call it that, of Sweden and deregulation is the government and state support. Perhaps it was accidental to start with, but it became very focused, and the government has really supported the development of a competitive market and has not kept its control over the incumbent SJ, but actually put it out to full competition.
Thanks. So yeah, some of the highlights from some of the international stakeholders who have also participated and been part of the community of producing the Rail Baltica infrastructure management study. And our next speaker, in fact the keynote speaker for this event, will be Chris Docker. We've spent quite a few months working together as ATKINS, I would argue a world-class partner, has delivered an independent infrastructure management study. It was one of the prerequisites by all of the stakeholders involved, both here in the Baltic, also our partners in the European Union, that an independent study is undertaken, and given of course the variety of views and variety of options of how Rail Baltica can be managed, to have a detailed assessment and produce what could be recommended as the optimum model. So Chris, the floor is yours to deliver a keynote and introduce us with the findings of this milestone study, which is available in full. It's more than 500 pages on our website, railbaltica.org. But Chris will give you the skinning of it.
Thank you. Hopefully today I will save you from ever having to read 500 pages of an infrastructure management report. So today what I'm going to take you through is basically a brief summary of the process that we followed, and then I'm going to talk about perhaps the implications for the logistics supply chain here in the region. Now, one of the key things to kind of think about is actually what an infrastructure manager is, and depending on who you speak to, where in the world you go, you get some overlap, but some very, very different opinions at times. At its simplest level, you'll find some infrastructure managers who regard themselves as engineering companies. They're there to fix and maintain and polish an asset. Other companies you meet, and they will be very much focused upon the availability of train paths, about that engagement with the marketplace. And again, you'll get some who are very much more focused upon the end customer relationships. These are all interrelated, and the one thing that I think you need to understand is perhaps how infrastructure management is evolving around the world, about how it tries to now unlock gross value add for the economy. And in the work that we've done and in the process we've followed, we've tried to create an organisational structure and processes that really will give the very, very best for the region. And to do that, what we've done is we've looked at kind of the core elements initially of infrastructure management worldwide, whether it's looking at network planning, whether it's looking at train path allocation, or indeed the maintenance side of things. Now, all these different things are what we regard as kind of core functions. Any organisation has to be able to deliver them competently and effectively. Now, the key word here is effectively. So, if you look at infrastructure management within a national remit, you end up with looking at how you create synergies with different elements of the network. Rail Baltica is unlike any other railway in the world. And the reason we can say that with confidence is that we did conduct an international benchmarking regime. And we looked at different examples from around the world. And there is no template. We do not have an example anywhere in the world of a railway line controlled by a single entity that goes across 3 states. Nor do we have anything that really gives us a perfect match. There's nothing that we could look for directly. What we did find was we found evidence in many different areas about the challenges that existed around cross-border infrastructure management, particularly where those related to handoffs and maintenance. And I can come into those in more detail. So we then conducted a very extensive stakeholder consultation process. We went round Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia, and we spoke to be honest, anyone that would listen to us to try and not just provide our views about what effective infrastructure management looked like, but also to try and listen. And that was the key thing. And in a perfect world, I would have, on my tiny little chart on the right that you can't see, I would have a very, very clear page of green, and that would show me perfect alignment. The reality was, though, was that there was no consensus between the different infrastructure management operators that exist in the region today, or even the key stakeholders in supply chain, whether it's from freight forwarding associations to businesses in the region. Very, very different views on what the Rail Baltica infrastructure manager should look like. Now, what we tried to do when we were going through our assessment was we had a very structured methodology, and we looked at a very large range of different options that really reflected a sliding scale from an existing national model, where you'd have 3 infrastructure managers as they are today, through to one very, very heavily integrated, strongly centralised model. And within that, there's a range, effectively, of hybrids. And within those hybrids, we selected different functions, and they were all assessed using very, very complicated multi-criteria analysis, a very structured mathematical methodology, which the scoring for which, not just the scoring, but our methodology is completely available to read if you ever want to read another 500 pages on top of the 500 pages that are published. Now, within that, we started to look at the life cycle costs of the different models, and it was there that we kind of came up and we actually discovered one of those kind of unpleasant truths that you never really want to have as a consultant. So what we found was that while there is a really, really, really strong case for having a centralised infrastructure management model, in the short term at least particularly, there is a cost differential. So the existing infrastructure managers on a national basis have cost advantages. The problem is, though, with that, is that it's all around the quality of the service and what we are trying to create here. This is about trying to create an organisation that is fit for the future and that does something very, very different in the region, that becomes really open for business and really actually starts to be able to interact with the marketplace in a way that we think is needed based on the feedback that we got. So the end organisation structure is relatively lean. It's just under 600 heads for maintenance. 600 heads for maintenance on an outsourced basis, about 143 heads for maintenance insourced, and then the core functions being described by another 145 heads. And that's about 10% more efficient than a typical European infrastructure manager. So slightly more efficient, but it is not radically different. And the reason for that is that obviously many of these organisations are still having to discharge the same functions. What you don't see in the detail behind that, though, is you see that we have made allowance for the presence of things like business managers to engage with and facilitate activity within the logistics arena. So we've come up with an infrastructure management model that we believe is something that gives the best chance of success for Rail Baltica to succeed, and that is for the business case to succeed. And this is where a line like Rail Baltica is really unique, and this is where it needs help from you to really, really fly. And the reason is that Rail Baltica is built on freight. Let's be really quite open about this. It's freight. It's a high-speed passenger line, but freight is absolutely intrinsic to its success. Now, the reason for that is when we started to go through the different findings, when we actually went and we spoke to different businesses and different stakeholders, the general feedback was that the existing infrastructure managers in the region, they weren't market oriented. They didn't necessarily listen to their customers. If they responded, the general feeling was that things were slower than perhaps they would have liked. There was poor cross-border cooperation, and that was not just something that was reported in face-to-face meetings, but there is a huge body of evidence that has been captured across the EU. Now, there are a number of different work streams that are in place to try and resolve this. There are things such as RailNet that are coming to play that will help things, but fundamentally, the very nature of cross-border infrastructure management today means that there is always a risk of delay, and in traffic management, in terms of even the prioritisation of different types of traffic. We also see different issues emerging across Europe in different infrastructure managers with regards to different interpretation of technical rules, things that actually make it a lot harder for say, train manufacturing companies to actually obtain certification for their rolling stock across the different networks. And we also had expressed many times fears about cross-subsidisation existing within the existing holdings of the infrastructure managers. Now, one of the things that we've recognised is that there are huge strides being made by the infrastructure managers today to actually improve. And to be honest, in the engagement I had with them, I'm genuinely impressed, and I think they've got very, very robust improvement plans in place. The one thing that we did do, however, was that we looked at existing benchmarking information, and those infrastructure managers today have a significant step to get to a European average. Now, we do know that they will get there, and we worked from the assumption that we were going to be comparing effectively at that stage a European average performing infrastructure manager on a national basis with a multinational one. And so what we've kind of got is that we work from a very level playing field. So where we've ended up with our recommendation of what was option 57, which is a single infrastructure manager but very much a hybrid option, is we've got something that hopefully is relatively better. And the reasons for that comes not just from the technical analysis, but also again from the voice of the customer. So if you look, there are we got very strong feedback with regards to the advantages of having one infrastructure manager with regards to strategic timetable planning, capacity planning and allocation, and long-term planning. All those kind of things get a lot easier. Even things as simple as possession planning. So if you imagine a world where you had 3 infrastructure managers and they all decide to, in an uncoordinated way, do railway maintenance possessions on the same night, how do you coordinate keeping the trains running? Real basic things that happen on a day-to-day basis that we need to think about. And it's those kind of operational details that lend itself towards a single model. But the reality is that we need to still make Rail Baltica a major success. And to do that, we need to recognise that one of the biggest things in terms of risk is that the traffic patterns don't materialise. And that comes from, there are many different factors there. We've looked at this in terms of a bow tie analysis, which is in the document. And some of those major risks are around customer confidence. And what hopefully here today you will get is a feeling of not just my own conviction that this is the right solution, but also confidence that actually it's now time to start getting behind the infrastructure management recommendations and working out how you can actually invest in Rail Baltica and actually make the most of this. So, we recognise that what's needed is that the market has to readily price and access, be able to readily price and access trade paths. we recognise that the market has an appetite to invest, and that's something that was said specifically with regards to the multimodal terminals, where it's felt that in the existing arrangements it's very hard to get the prime locations and efficient locations. And we also think that the market also wants to have an opportunity to try and support the gross value add commercial activities, which I can come on to in a while. Now, as part of that, if you just read the opening 5 or 6 pages of the infrastructure management report, which is a fantastic read, one of the things that I think you can bring forward is that there are a few kind of key principles that we tried to bring out. So yes, it has to be strongly focused on the core functions of the operational railway. You know, it's in some ways it's a traditional infrastructure manager. It's the culture that will hopefully be very, very different. You know, we see that the infrastructure manager will act as a landlord for the terminals along the route, and what that means is that this is about creating a neutral platform where you will all be able to engage and actually get access to the train paths you want and the services you want in the time you want. And some of that comes down to how we're going to structure effectively the environment and the culture, you know, which has to be ethical, it has to be transparent, and by that I mean absolute world class in terms of transparency and ethics and how it behaves. And to do that, that is all about creating the structure to deliver the business case, and it has to have a governance regime on top of that that will allow it to evolve over time. And all these things are obviously to be decided and discussed by the beneficiaries going forward. So if we can take 3 things back to remember from here. Firstly, we have really, really clear findings. A single infrastructure manager will perform better due to the coordination, particularly around the cross-border activities. The other key finding that we found is really, really simple. When companies such as mine or infrastructure managers around the world do forecasts with regards to business cases, the vast majority of times they're wrong. Yeah? And I'm being slightly exaggerating to make a point here. Where things go wrong, people get overexcited about the passenger forecasts, and they basically assume that passenger revenues will come faster and to a greater degree. Passenger forecasts are generally slower to materialise, and that's something which we need to be cautioned in any business case. However, where the positive flip side to that is that companies generally underestimate how well freight can perform. The freight market has great potential, and actually if the freight operators are given a strong voice in how the railway evolves, how the track access works, then actually freight tends to outperform. Yeah? And that outperformance is something that we need to actually try and target. So, you know, the market wants to really get the maximum gain from the commercial opportunity here. This is now really about, you know, read the study. If you're confident behind it, then endorse it, because I believe sincerely that there are some significant benefits for the logistics companies. So all the infrastructure managers will be able to offer you a single point of contact. But there is one slight difference here, is that if we have a single infrastructure manager, the turnaround time for your responses should be far faster, because there will be no need for external interfaces. There will be that single view and vision of how the track is being maintained. The performance of the network will be understood in one place. So all those different things facilitate much simpler pricing and turnaround. You'll see an environment where there's less disruption to traffic on the border, and in terms of traffic prioritisation, that will be consistent. You will understand the order that your freight will arrive, and that really then gives you that consistent platform is what gives you the ability to look at developing and investing in trackside multimodal facilities. And effectively what we've looked at is we've looked at Rail Baltica being a landlord client. Now we haven't looked into the detailed terms of that, but in the UK this is generally a peppercorn rent. It's a tiny nominal amount of rent where they manage the overall facilities associated with access to the terminals, but effectively you have the market capability to establish your own businesses within there, and I'm sure that's something that the RBAS will be building on and working up over the next year or so. And the other thing is that this is going to be an organisation which will have to be managed by KPIs and performance, and that will give you visibility on how well the different elements of the network are performing. So really what needs to happen now is very simple. The report has been written. Some of you may read it. Yeah, those of you that don't, please read the introduction, because that is really kind of the core findings. But we're now at a time that we need to have positive advocacy for what this business is trying to do. I think the passion in RBAS is absolutely fantastic, and I think there's a genuine desire to use the opportunity of Rail Baltica to unlock market opportunities within the region. So, consider what this looks like at this stage. Can you become an anchor client? Can you start having those early engagement discussions with RBAS about what your involvement in the program would look like? And, use the next year or so to actually help shape the opportunity that is Rail Baltica, because, to be honest, there aren't many schemes like this around the world, and you are in a fantastically privileged position. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, of course, also to your team, yourself and your team for delivering this monumental study. I mean, you've shown us the tip of the iceberg, but it also illustrates the complexity and magnitude of the study, or the part of the iceberg that's under the water. Please join us for the panel. We'll also take the time to introduce the rest of our panelists. Let's start with Normunds Krūmiņš. He's president of the Latvian Logistics Association. He's been with the association for 20 years, including establishing. And if I have to mention one highlight, I mean, as many of you know, there are around 300,000 containers now traveling between China and Europe over land by rail. But 10 years back, in fact 12 years back in 2007, there were only a handful of cowboys that dared to pilot these type of activities, actually taking train shipments all the way from China to Europe via the Baltic states all the way to the port of Hamburg. And Normunds was one of those cowboys. So, and ever since those times, I have had the personal privilege of cooperating with Normunds in different capacities, and it's been a privilege indeed. So, a Latvian logistics guru, please join the panel. So next up is ATKINS, a very well-known figure in the wider Rail Baltica community, today representing the Transport Working Group of the Foreign Investors Council here in Latvia, but in many ways also representing the international investment community that captures the entire Baltic and the wider regions, but also as the Baltic head of ACOM has been involved in a number of critical studies and activities to propel Rail Baltica project forward. So Arne, most welcome. And last but not least, we have the privilege of also inviting Professor Inna Steinbuka. She's currently the head of the master's program in European Studies at the University of Latvia, but has also enjoyed a very illustrious career in the European Union institutions, not least as head of the European Commission representation here in Latvia for 7 years. Before that, also as a part of different Commission services, and she also serves as special advisor to Vice President of the European Commission, Mr. Valdis Dombrovskis, and further back in her professional past, she was head of the Public Utilities Committee, so obviously has great insights into the wonderful virtue of competition in the different industries. So I'm very pleased to join the panel. We'll have we will have the possibility of discussing also the contents of the study and Chris's presentation. The audience will also have, at a certain point, possibilities of asking questions, interacting directly with the panelists. But let me start, before we tackle kind of the bull by the horns, let me give the panelists the possibility to introduce their organization and its relevance to Rail Baltica. So let's start with Normund. And Chris, I think we had a nice introduction of ATKINS. Let's start with Normunds and then proceed with others.
Yeah. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm representing Latvian Logistics Association. And at the moment we are joining the members from various fields of business and also academics. We have the local logistics providers, and the majority of international logistics providers that are represented in Latvia are also our members. At the same time, we have also several universities represented in our association. We have the companies that are dealing with real estate issues. We have the companies that are dealing with wholesale products distribution. We have ferry lines and Stena line particularly. Representative and the chairman is also represented here. Actually, we have the broadest possible mix of different logistics players, and let's say almost 2/3 of them are related also with some rail business, whether with customs-wise or freight forwarding or railway operators. So that's some brief introduction.
Thank you. Harri?
Today I'm representing the Foreign Investors Council of Latvia. The Foreign Investors Council of Latvia is a very large organization that by all means is and represents a very large component of the investment community of Latvia. It represents 20% roughly of all companies in Latvia. 48% of the taxes paid in Latvia come from our members, and roughly 27% of the employees of Latvia are represented in some form or fashion in the Foreign Investors Council. Our members are a large player, and as such, because of that, especially as it relates to Rail Baltica as a new economic corridor, it's very important that the foreign investors understand the framework of Rail Baltica, how they will be able to interact with that, and hopefully build business as well. The mission of the Foreign Investors Council is, of course, to improve the business environment in Latvia through active dialogue with the government. So we work to advise about transparent platforms so that the investment climate is better for these members. We have many working groups, and I represent the Transportation Working Group, which is as closely tied to this project as can be. And we're currently on the path in the next couple of weeks to present to the High Council, which is the ministers of Latvia, the Cabinet of Ministers, to support our position to hold and make sure that we're doing everything possible to maintain the existing investors that are currently in Latvia so that they do not leave. And how do we attract and sell new projects, new opportunities to new investors from the global scene to Latvia. And as such, we look at good governance, we look at transparency, we look at competitiveness, which are all tenets of our members, and to make sure that they can play in this market. And attracting new investors, we're looking at ways in which to attract them to capital projects, large infrastructure projects, operational models, such as this infrastructure management model, and how do we also broaden the technology reach so that, again, our members can participate in Latvia's economic growth.
Thank you, Harri. And Professor Timo.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to this very professional discussion. I'm representing the academic community of Latvia. I'm working at the Academy of Science. I have launched the European Policy Research Institute at the Academy, and I'm closely affiliated with this institute at the University of Latvia. I'm professor at the Economic, Business and Management Department, so management is a keyword also for today's discussion. My personal topic of academic interest is how to raise productivity and competitiveness in Latvia. It's not only topic, but it is the most relevant for today's discussion. As to my personal experience, You have already told that I dealt with the regulation of transport services when I was chair of the Public Utilities Commission in Latvia. At that time, we had regulated tariffs for passengers. So, and further, I used to work in the European Commission in different services. So, as this project is heavily supported by the European Commission, I think that my experience in dealing with European matters is also perhaps constructive for this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we go into specific detailed questions on different aspects, let me have another round with the panelists with regard to your kind of general messages or reflections about the infrastructure management study, about its role, and again also in light of the interests of the contingencies or the constituencies that you represent. So, Norman.
Thanks. I will try to be short, but let's see, try to cover also majority of the issues. First of all, if we are talking about the Rail Baltica project and Baltic countries as such, and especially north-south direction, then we are getting roughly several 100 kilometers per each country. And the basics of all railway traffics all around the world is starting from 300, 500 kilometers. It means that if we are dividing this infrastructure management system into three different parts, then we are getting, for the operators, we are getting three different agreements, and each agreement is covering roughly 250 kilometers, 250 kilometers roughly. So that is absolutely a nightmare, and it's not gonna to work. Why I can tell this? If you are speaking about the Baltic countries north-south direction, at the moment we also have the infrastructure ready. There is rail infrastructure. You can travel by train from Estonia up to Poland border. And there have been several projects that have tried to tackle this possibility to use this Rail Baltica route. And one of the companies I know that's coming from the Rail group, they are at the moment active in mostly in Poland, but also some activities in Estonia. And Estonian company is called Baltic Rail. And I know that some 6 years ago they tried to implement exactly the same service, the Pan-Baltic container service from Poland border up to Tallinn. They have concluded agreements with all three railway administrations, but unfortunately this project was not successful. And therefore, if we are going further and implementing all those nice infrastructure solutions and speed and integrity with the EU network, we should keep in mind that this border between the selling these infrastructure services and just maintaining them, this is very, very narrow. And infrastructure management, I would call it more, say, like a production in the normal business. Yeah? You are producing some product, and then via these infrastructure fees, you are getting some sales out of that. And say, if you are taking that, if I would like to buy this page, yeah, this is rather small page like Baltics, and if I'm doing like that, and you would like me to buy 3 pieces of this page, then probably it's not the most effective way. I'd say that some thoughts about the infrastructure management and how the business is looking on these questions. So yeah, from practical point of view, Kaspar's already mentioned, we with the group of colleagues were involved in several railway projects and cross-border projects. And he named me as a cowboy, but okay, we were maybe more pragmatic cowboys. But yeah, we did these first trials from China up to Europe by train. And in that particular case, we are speaking about the countries that is having more than 3,000 kilometers in each country. Yeah. China, Kazakhstan, Russia. Yeah. So, and even in this case, concluding all those agreements, getting necessary capacity, and all those practical things, they were very, very complicated. And if we are doing the same on the 10 times smaller scale and leaving the same complexity as it is now, then we should be really, really very careful about this model split into 3 different parts. And as already ATKINS mentioned, that this is, let's say, not maybe the best option, especially for this small country. But I think that this question is mainly addressed to the shareholders of the Rail Baltica project, because I know from the RB Rail itself, they are very much engaged in this business development and as Kaspar's mentioned, to try to develop an economic corridor. But to gain this, we need to create some traffic on the Rail Baltica itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Norman. Arne?
Thank you. Yeah, I'll be very blunt. I mean, from the foreign investment community, providing a platform that is simple, that is centralized, will reap benefits much more than some platform or management model that is decentralized. We support, of course, the ATKINS recommendation that the infrastructure manager provides not only those core functions of development, operations, and maintenance, which I think is without doubt, but also starts working on commercialization activities and other what I would call business value add type of functions. The more of those type of functions that are centered within the infrastructure manager will give any company that's willing and able to work within this context an easier time to establish business. The infrastructure manager, in essence, must reduce the risk of an investor coming in. They need to eliminate concerns of anti-competitiveness and corrupt procedures. And number 3, that infrastructure manager must improve the willingness to invest. And how does that done? Through scale, as Norman's mentioned. I mean, 800 kilometers is not something you should be splitting into pieces. Predictability along the entire line, stability along the entire line, confidence in the line across all those borders, and of course, negotiating with that infrastructure manager is all about speed to market. If the infrastructure manager can give the appropriate terms and conditions to using the line, people will come and use it. So we really do support the principles and the recommendations that ATKINS has put forward, that single coherent entity has to be anchored on values and quality, not on low cost. It needs to be long-term vision, not a short-term vision, and the quicker, the better to put an infrastructure manager into play so that they're even here developing their principles while the infrastructure is actually being developed and built.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let me look at the Rail Baltica project from the European perspective. I must say that this is indeed a flagship European project. a mega project because it brings value added not only to Latvia or to the 3 Baltic states, but first of all for Europe as a whole, for the European Union. It's a project which provides connectivity, which unlock trade and investment potential, which brings a lot of comfort to different customers, to Europeans and non-Europeans, but also maybe first of all for freight. It has also a big geopolitical importance, and that's why European Commission decided to co-finance this project by about 80 or 85% from the European budget. But it was in the current multi-annual financial perspective. As to the future, it has to be decided by the European Parliament, by the new European Parliament. Okay, so, and despite all rosy perspectives that it will most likely be done, but we are not 100% sure what the new Parliament will decide about the European priorities. And that's why one of the very important preconditions to convince the new European governance, political governments, and also European Commission to continue financing of this project is its cost effectiveness and also delivery. The European Commission and Parliament should be convinced with some very convincing justifications that the project will indeed be cost effective. And that's why I think that this discussion about the infrastructure management, cross-border management, which has been organized today in Latvia, is of utmost importance. I'm personally very support the idea of having this outsourcing and to publish this big project with 500 pages. I must say I have not read these 500 pages, and I doubt I will do it. But it's enough with the findings, which I have heard today and which I have briefly also read in the summary of findings, and they are very convincing. It's indeed very unique project with the unique approach to suggest a relevant and justified model how to manage this project. Of course, integrated approach is much better from the systemic viewpoint than fragmented approach, and it should be more cost efficient, should provide indeed long-term strategic planning and vision and all these things. So hopefully the discussion within the Baltic states will be supportive, and as to myself, you can rely on my support because you said you should advocate the project. I will. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Chris, you want to respond to some of the arguments?
Thank you. So I think overall, the general feedback is very positive. I think there's a common vision here in the room about how the infrastructure manager should be established and set up. And I think the key thing here is that what you've got a range of views from academia through to representatives from logistics through to foreign investment. And I think the fact that we have such a broad spectrum of people trying to push behind such a common vision really is something that gives me confidence that actually we can do this as we propose. Because if we don't get momentum behind this, these things can wither on the vine. The infrastructure management study was always around creating a case for a political decision-making process. But I think what we have here today is we need to have the voices of the community in the three countries actually coming forward and saying they endorse this as well, because the one thing politicians do is they do listen to people.
Thank you. As one of the kind of first questions I will take from where Norman's mentioned, I mean, we all, of course, realize that there is Russian gauge connection between the three Baltic states. At the same time, in 2004, as the EU enlarged, the Baltic states joined the EU, trade relationships between the Baltic states and the European Union increased considerably. I mean, up to the tune of around 80% of Baltic exports are vis-a-vis the rest of the European Union. But at the same time, we saw that it was mostly road transportation and maritime transportation that captured that additional trade and additional trade flows. Also for our partners in Finland, who is in many ways a transportation island that doesn't have much in the way of alternatives before Rail Baltica is delivered. So I want the panelists also to reflect on what do you see as the key reasons why rail freight is not developing on the north-south axis at the moment, and what can we do to avoid the same kind of situation with Rail Baltica? So I think Professor Steinbuckel, let's start with you.
Well, I must say I'm not a big expert in this comparison of road, maritime, and train services. But I must say that being the part of the former Soviet Union, it was certain infrastructure built in the Soviet times, okay, which was heavily oriented towards the Soviet market, and with a totally different technical solution, and without having, perspectives to trade with the Western world. Unfortunately, this infrastructure in the railway services, it's expensive infrastructure, could not be rebuilt within a short period of time. And even within a bit longer period of time, it's very costly, and the budget, because it's state-owned company in all three Baltic states, okay, not private, and the state, the government has not opportunity to invest into this project. Now, there is a totally different opportunities with the co-financing from the European Commission. It can be rebuilt, and I recall the discussion in the beginning of this project. In the beginning, it was said, well, there will be no freights, nothing to actually. These very costly services should be maintained. At the same time, there will be no trade with the Western world, because everything what you said, it's already delivered by road or by sea, but there will be empty trains. Following from. But in fact. I'm very happy that today I don't hear a lot of this sort of discussion, because if there is no opportunities, there is no trade. Okay, if there is all facilities to facilitate this trade and investment, then it will happen. It just will appear, and that's why I think for the future, these speedy train services, which will connect the Baltic states with the north and with the south, will provide totally different opportunities for the trade. It will be different structure of trade.
I think it's quite logical why north-south trade, especially freight, hasn't evolved in a rail type of environment, because it all has to do with journey times. It has to do with reduced bottlenecks. If you think about it, if I'm going to draw this backwards so that you can see it, rail traffic to take something via rail from Tallinn to Poland, you go Tallinn, Tartu, Riga, Jelgava, Sauljae, Kaunas, and downward. It's a fragmented trip. You have Via Baltica right next to it, which is a straight line from north to south. And why do you think you have road traffic. It's because it's a straight line, it's faster, it's more effective. So I think as Rail Baltica has now evolved into a fast, conventional rail line of speed and geographic straightness, it will attract much of the demand that is currently on the roads and will transfer to rail. And if the infrastructure manager comes into play as one singular centralized organization, all of a sudden you've reduced the bottlenecks, the cross-border bottlenecks. So I think currently, of course, maritime and roads are utilized primarily because they're straight. Same with ships, they travel straight, they don't travel in S curves. Rail will be there now, and coupling not only maritime, road, rail, and air, then all of a sudden you have the multimodality that becomes very interesting, very engaging to the investment community to utilize. It gives people choice.
Thanks.
Okay, for say moving from road to rail, what we need from logistics point of view, from cargo owner's point of view, only two components: price and service. So simple. Let me explain each of them. What we are, where are we at the moment? Let's start with the price. We have compared with one of our members, Stena Line. We have compared, let's say, even one internal combined transport trip within Latvia from Liepāja to Riga. What we are getting with the existing infrastructure prices, with the existing service price, we are getting more than 2 times higher price per door-to-door delivery than it is with the road transportation. That's quite simple answer on this price side. From the service side, can you name me, I don't know, 1, 2, 3 operators that at the moment are offering something on the north-south route by rail? Few answers. About the necessity from the market, even in Logistics Association, we had several discussions regarding this matter. And I will name one of our members, that's Javi Logistics, that is serving Riihimäki and Riihimäki supermarkets all over the Baltics. And even with the one player in the market, they would make at least half a train each night from Riga, both to Tallinn and to Vilnius, just as a single player. And in that respect, that could be related with Rail Baltica services, that could be combined transportation, replacing trucking with this combined transport. But again, we have examined the potential discounts, whatever you can achieve from the existing railway administrations, tariff-wise, with the railway operators, and it's not coming even close to the road trucking price. And also service-wise, if you are using the tracker, you can every time call him and ask, where are you? Can you see the orange gate or blue gate? Yeah, you should enter this gate. And that is this small service components that are on everyday base. They are very, very essential. And devil is always in the details.
Thanks. Chris, an outsider's perspective, but one that has learned a lot about the Baltic logistics industry.
So as an outsider, but 21 years ago, a truck driver, I have to say I actually quite like trucks. But I think the thing here is that it is just all about price. The reality is that even today, governments could drive traffic onto the existing network that is there simply by the introduction of measures such as road pricing. The reality is that they're politically very, very unpopular, and even though there's pressure from the EU with regards to carbon and the such like, the reality is that they are not, in no country are they actually being employed, perhaps outside of city centres where there are congestion charges coming in. There are no mechanisms being put in place to incentivise people to move away from long-distance trucking. I also don't think that will change until the network changes. So there's the structural issue, as you alluded to, of the fact that we need a straight rail line. This is about speed, product, time to market. It varies on lots of different factors, on the type of product that is being delivered, the percentage of the value of the product versus the inventory carrying cost. But these are kind of basic economic models that you kind of build up. I think the key thing is that Rail Baltica gives that opportunity for a shift. It gives the opportunity for a shift in a clean carbon environment, and that is where actually you start to be able to have much more subtle government controls and influences to encourage that shift onto a different transport mode. And that's why this is so exciting.
Thank you, Kristen. I think one key conclusion also from this discussion is, Arne, what you alluded to, the multimodal element in this. Again, the role of this question is not to kind of antagonize between the different modes of transport, where in the future, in the seamless, digitally connected supply chain, you would have all of the modes represented, especially in something as complex as Rail Baltica. You will have the sea component, for example, between Helsinki and Tallinn, then hopefully the large capacity, longer shoulder shipment by rail, and then of course nothing beats the truck for door-to-door distribution in a lower radius environment. So of course something that we also carry as part of our philosophy is that, and I think Mr. Ruas of Stanaline and some of the more progressive trucking companies in the Baltic would attest that Rail Baltica is an opportunity for everyone. This is not about stealing someone else's freight, but rather creating a bigger pie from everyone, and where it is economically feasible, transferring that freight onto rail. But everyone benefits.
It's instead of a replace, it's an enhance. I mean, you're not replacing services, it's an enhancement. It's not modal shift anymore to me, it's modal merge.
Right.
It's a modal merge so that Havi Logistics truck flies onto a rail bed in 22 seconds and is on the rail heading southbound or northbound, pops off the rail at a certain location again in 22 seconds and can deliver to door, you know, without having to unpack, without having to transfer goods. And that's where, if an infrastructure manager starts taking over the landlord functions of intermodal terminals, that's where that technology can be enhanced, because there's a centralized place where the thought process of the full link of all of those elements can come together, and you can purchase and procure the appropriate technologies to enhance that modal merge instead of a modal shift. So,
thanks. Chris, I'll stay with you for the next question, and soon we will be opening up for the audience questions. One of the key features of the model that you propose is also its governance structure. And of course, building on your knowledge of the existing Rail Baltica project delivery joint venture, there are numerous suggestions as to how a single inframanager entity is to be either owned or managed, or what would be the institutional governance underpinning it, not least to insulate it further from any kind of direct political interference. Or maybe it is even inevitable in an infrastructure like this.
Excuse me. So I think it's fair to say that almost every infrastructure manager around the world suffers some form of political interference. So don't assume that's going to go away anytime soon. I think the real way that I would look at this is it's about trying to create a structure that is at arm's length as far as is possible. So it is right and proper that the beneficiaries will continue to have oversight and strategic control and guidance of the infrastructure manager, but it has to be left alone to do what it needs to do and what only it can do best. This will be a body that understands its own assets, it understands the relationships in the marketplace, it will understand actually how it can help drive economic growth because it will be close to its customers. Those are elements that actually it will need to focus on without distraction. It's going to need to try and do the best thing for the route and not necessarily the best thing for individual countries. It's a balancing act. Now, it will obviously be having to work within the framework for economic investment that each of those national governments sets it. It will have to take that information in. But let's be realistic. This is also a project that's 85% funded by the EU. They are looking for the outcome to benefit the region. Yeah, and that guiding mind and that link to the EU, we can't throw away. This is a very, very different kind of project, and I think the governance structure is very much as arm's length, appropriate oversight, but with genuine freedom for this business to deliver good, close working relationships with its customers, and above all, within an appropriate governance structure to allow it to evolve over time. So, one thing that is important to note is that we have provided a very large report, which is as comprehensive as we could possibly produce. The reality is that things change over time. The organisation will need flexibility to change and evolve over time as market conditions evolve. So the governance structure cannot be so rigid that that it can't react to the market. And for that reason, it needs to have a maturity and experience that enables it to really make the most of the opportunities that present itself, some of which we won't even recognise at this point.
Professor Steinbucher, want to reflect on that? Others?
Well, I fully share the opinion of Chris that 85% of co-financing can be provided only if the project provides benefits not only for the Baltic region actually, but for the whole Europe. It is a value added, European value added. Otherwise, it wouldn't be financed from the European budget. But of course, the Baltic region is first of all receiver of all benefits because it will unlock potential and bring perhaps less developed region, less developed territories of the region toward European average. I mean, cohesion is all, territorial cohesion is also important. Now, I fully agree also with your points that green connection is very important, both from European viewpoint and also from our perspective, because climate protection is one of the, at least current European Commission priorities, and I hope it will continue. The next point, I also can only agree that the governance structure should be somehow separated from political ownership and political interference. However, I can only agree it is impossible to guarantee 100% independence in this decision making, and maybe it also doesn't make sense because political leadership always is important. The problem is that different governments of three different countries can have also different opinions, but that's why this integrated infrastructure should be politically neutral and transparent, and also to have safeguards, enough safeguards against potential corruption.
I can add a little bit. I think from the investment perspective, I think Chris mentioned the word maturity. Maturity is, of course, important because that builds trust with an ultimate customer, between a client and a customer. And I think notions of this independent yet centralized infrastructure manager is one that, of course, you can build maturity very quickly by using strategies of outsourcing certain components of it. outsourcing to companies that have a track record, that have done this elsewhere. And then the foreign investor will feel more comfortable and confident that they will be able to be successful on the line. And if the customer, the ultimate customer, is successful and profitable, and the infrastructure manager outsourced is also successful and profitable, there won't be any issues, because it all comes down to price, money. But if everyone has the appropriate profitable business models, then it all works together.
Just one very short remark that we can speak about the joint Rail Baltica project, but at the same time, I think that everybody understands that each of Baltic countries has its own interests, and we can hide it, we can do whatever we need, but these interests are there. And that is, I think, the major political decision whether 3 Baltic countries, shareholders of Rail Baltica, really would like to implement this project, and if yes, then hopefully this decision will be made in favor of business. Otherwise, we see some few projects in railway field that audience part who is aware of some railway businesses maybe have heard about the famous container train Baltica Transit. Yeah, it was named all over. Yeah, that's the success story of all 3 Baltic countries, that we are bringing freight together and then further send it from Baltic ports to Central Asia. It ended up with the 3 different Baltica transits, one from Estonia, one from Latvia, and one from Lithuania. The same story with the traffic to Odessa, to Ukraine. Lithuanians have had the good project where also Latvians were participating, but then suddenly Latvian Railway implemented a train called Zubr. It's also duplicating actually more or less the same route. So this is some clear evidences of the practical outcomes when the things are not managed on the top level and with some clear understanding what should be the outcome. At the moment, from the business side, we need just one thing. It's very clear structure, very clear rules, how it will be managed and how it will be put forward.
Thank you, Norman. Let's open up for the audience questions now. There's a mic somewhere in the room, but please state your name and the institution that you represent. Please. Probably a very exciting discussion, but yes, please, Oscar. Microphone?
Okay, maybe I don't need it even. I can speak, I have quite low voice. Well, thank you for being invited to the panel discussion. I'm a Stena Line representative, Oscar, and managing director of commercial directors for the region Baltic and CIS countries. Well, in general, one remark is regarding, as you said, competitors within transport mode even don't try, because in general, I've been trying to do these rails and Estonian rail, but rubber wheels for 12 years and still fail. We must be competitors. I mean, as a complementary services in the market. Generally, when we talk about development of Rail Baltic as such, so our interests must mean more or less being aligned between areas of market and trend alignment. So in general, of course, we've been looking more for the developing of rail connectivity down to the west and east. However, taking into consideration that the Rail Baltica could be as a potential complementary services as such for the ferry businesses in our area, and taking account that the market is not really growing for the moment. I mean, a freight market in the region Baltic. Yeah, indeed, we have to looking forward how can we be complementary services and how can we synchronize our relationships and cooperation on serving the freight market with right product, right time, and in right commercial aspects. Well, but my question is regarding the how do you see the synergy between west and east and north-south connectivity for Rail Baltic? Will that be something what we would benefit out as a ferry operators in the market as well, from the north to south development of rail as such? Because we've been more looking for west and east connectivity as a moment. Yeah? And is there any synergy between north, south and west, east?
Thank you very much. Before I hand over to Normans to respond, I just wanted to mention that in our cost-benefit analyses, we see that there are three primary sources of freight generation for Baltic, and ATKINS knows this very well because it roughly reflects also our first generation CBA findings, is that you have, of course, Baltic import-export with the rest of the European Union, that's 1/3. Then you have the Finnish import-export with the rest of the European Union, 2nd, 3rd. And then the third is any kind of transshipment between the Russian gauge system and the European Rail Baltica. So anything coming east, south, southeast, via the Baltic states, transferring from the Russian gauge infrastructure onto Rail Baltica, is captured in our CBA. And that model has, and we also have EY representatives here in the room that can expand on that discussion, but there are relatively conservative assumptions when it comes to the ability of Baltic states, for example, Rail Baltica, to capture some of the China overland flows. So it's mostly Russia, the immediate neighborhood, Central Asia, and a little bit of China. So clearly everyone understands that the sky is the limit if Baltic states manage to emerge as this very efficient cross-loading platform as an alternative, for example, to the Brest-Malešice connectivity, overland connectivity between Asia and Europe. So clearly there's a very, very important potential for this modal merge or even rail system merge. And here again, the way that how these multimodal terminals and the freight villages will be managed, what kind of technologies will be in place in these terminals, will determine to what extent we can capture those flows, which would benefit not only the rail community, but also other modes of transport, including short sea shipping. Norman, do you want to have a business perspective, or anyone? Agni?
I mean, we're perfectly situated in the Baltics and have been forever as the gateway east-west. And that's not primarily any different in Latvia, Lithuania, or Estonia. I think it's very similar. And this type of a project could be the one complementary element that ties it much closer together at these major modes. I mean, there are 3 intermodal freight terminals being conceptualized, one in each of the countries. But again, with a centralized landlord type of management structure, you can have that independent manager start figuring out, well, how do you leverage the Latvian intermodal terminal for what functions? They shouldn't be the same functions as are in Estonia or in Lithuania. You should find complementary services that don't duplicate. And because the customer will go wherever they go to find the best price and the best service. And if the Baltics is looking in one cohesive way at this, that it's one service with kind of what I would call clusters of focus, all of a sudden you have a wonderful system that people again have choice. So I think it will enhance the north-south road traffic, the north-south rail traffic, the north-south maritime traffic, and potentially also air traffic, if merged correctly at these intermodal terminal locations. So,
Thanks. Any more questions from the audience? Okay, you will have another opportunity in a few minutes, but let me take our discussion then to the ongoing political negotiation. Of course, we've heard many requests from the business community, from the organizations representing the business, as to how can they engage and become part of that dialogue. Because clearly, this is a decision that will affect both the Rail Baltica infrastructure for the upcoming decades, but also the business ecosystem around it. So what are your views as to how that dialogue should take place, and how could you get involved with your business and institutional perspectives? Arni?
For us, as the Foreign Investors Council of Latvia, we have a pretty easy way in which to at least express our recommendations, our philosophies about this infrastructure, and that, of course, is our annual meetings with the Cabinet of Ministers, where we as a transport working group are reviewing the various planning reports that are coming from RB Rail, looking at the best recommendations that we can put forward to the Latvian government. That's where we can, of course, influence the most. We're not tied to Lithuania and Estonia as the foreign investors of Latvia, but always reinforcing not a nationalistic view of the project, but a regional perspective of the project. And that's that whole philosophy of looking long-term and not short-term, looking broader instead of shorter. And we'll use that tool to voice that to the political will here, to keep reinforcing an open, transparent, and centralized system for this infrastructure.
Thank you. Professor?
Well, I think that academic community can do definitely more, because the opinion and assessment of academicians usually at least should have some impact on decision makers. But as I said, if you need our voice to be heard, we can discuss further line to take. It can be, different can have different formats, how to express our opinion, at which level, and by using press, by using publications, by using different sort of trying to influence politicians. As I already said, you can rely on my advocacy, but of course one person doesn't make any big sense, so I have to involve some other influential people from the research community to formulate our opinion.
Thank you very much. Norman?
From the business community point of view, I think that there are a few very important aspects besides those that have been already mentioned regarding the price, service-wise, etc. If you are looking on the current tendencies, not even current, it's already going on for at least some last 5-6 years. Let's take even European examples. Let's take the port of Hamburg, or let's take the world's biggest inland port, Duisport. What they are doing, how they are attracting cargo flows to their infrastructure projects. They are establishing bodies, cargo collection points all over the Europe. Yeah. They are searching for cargo. They are going for it. They are not just creating infrastructure and making good marketing and trying to attract somebody by just advertising and saying some good about themselves. they are really actively going for this cargo. They are establishing, let's say, the feeder traffic and both on rails and on ferries. They are collecting them in the industrial areas all over the Europe. And that's the case for Rail Baltica if we are speaking about the broader scope of this economic corridor. That's the direction where actually politicians together with business people can success. Otherwise, business scale in Baltics is not huge. Honestly, we are rather small companies, and even on a European level, not even talking about on the world map. Yeah. But together with some political players, we can start the negotiations with the same Duisport guys, with the Hamburg guys who have already implemented these successful models, how they are surviving in this increasing competition between all the ports. If you are looking, let's say, on the north part of Germany, how many ports we can count there? Some 6, 7 ports. Yeah. And each of them, they are fighting for this cargo. Yeah. If you are not going to get it to your project, to your infrastructure, then most probably it will never come.
I think if I may refer to a phrase that you once mentioned, is that taking a decision on infrastructure management without engaging the business community is as far as designing a cycling track without consulting the cyclists.
It's famous Riga case, yeah.
Right. Any more questions from the audience? Right, so Chris, you want to deliver some concluding remarks as the author of the report?
Well, first of all, thank you for, I guess, the privilege of being involved in this project. I think for me, where things are now is that we've provided an evidence-based report, and as far as I'm concerned now, it is a political process. This is about sovereign governments deciding what they believe is right for their citizens. And the one thing I would take away, we have our own political problems in the UK at the moment, but I would like to say that you should all be really proud, actually, of how your governments have engaged on this. And it might feel very challenging at times, and it certainly has been from our perspective. But the one thing that's come across has been a massive desire to do the right thing. And that is a great reflection on political engagement. And that gives me confidence that actually we'll get the right solution out of this. The one thing I would say, though, is that if I leave you with a little story. So there's a road in the UK that you won't have heard of. It's called the Watling Street. And it was designed to improve regional connectivity in Britain. And today it's run by the local councils. And originally it was built by Italians. And originally it had infrastructure management every 20 miles along the route. So the Watling Street was built by the Romans in around about 49 AD, so it's 2,000 years ago. Now, that road is still there today. It still provides economic benefits. It connects many of our regional towns. This is about the efficiency of delivery. So we've come up with something that is what we believe a solution that will do the very, very best for this region. But the one thing not to lose sight of is just get it built, because that is ultimately the most important thing. I really, really hope it will come out exactly as we've planned, but don't lose sight of the end objective, which is to connect the region and build on that, and just keep faith, because I think this really is one of the great projects in the world today.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you very much to the panelists. Thank you very much to the audience. That concludes our discussion today. Thanks.